Welcome to the NJ Criminal Podcast and part 3 in this series.
Let's switch gears for a minute and let's talk about Force Analysis LLC. Tell me about that. How'd that come about, and tell me what it is specifically that you're doing.
Well, it's a consulting company that I started in January of this year, and it's consulting on use of force. Basically, whether it's a criminal case, a civil case, or an administrative case, either the officer or his attorneys can hire me to review a case, or if a prosecutor's office or district attorney's office want me to review it on a criminal aspect to see if the force was reasonable. When you do expert consultation, you have to do both sides. You can't just say, hey, I'm only going to do use of force that favor the police. You can't do that, because you have to be fair, you have to be objective, and you have to be impartial on every case that you look at. And let's be honest, there are uses of force by police that are not reasonable. And you have to be willing to accept that and take those types of cases and have to testify and basically explain why the officer's use of force was not reasonable. Certainly not something I look forward to, but that's the business that I guess I volunteered to be in.
Well, right, and I guess it's about being able to be fair and objective.
Yes,
and it sounds
that's
like
exactly what it is.
Decades of experience and your familiarity with the new directive puts you in a perfect position to be able to do that. Are you able to review just state police or all departments types of cases?
I cannot do any state police cases whatsoever.
Got it.
Or probably any case that the state themselves, as in the Attorney General's office, is looking at while I'm currently employed in law enforcement. But any local or prosecutor's office type cases I can certainly do, are out-of-state cases, and all that's what I was going to
ask you. Are you limited to, in terms of your expertise, New Jersey, or do you see force analysis being something where you can, testify in other states?
No, I can certainly testify in other states. You just have to be cognizant of the guidelines in those states. Obviously, the Graham versus Connor, that's the federal standard that most states go by, objective reasonableness. But there are states that hold more of a stricter policy and law when it comes to objective reasonableness. So I can certainly do any state. I know lots of use of force experts, as I've been trained by experts throughout the country, that they basically have their own companies now, and they do consultation in other states, not just the ones that they live in. But it's certainly challenging in today's environment, being a police officer. But that's what everyone signs up to be, that want to do this job, and you have to change with the times, whether you like it or not.
Right.
And the most important thing is to go home safe.
Well, right. And I know from my the time that I worked as a prosecutor and trained law enforcement, one of the first things we always said was, look, the number one rule is to go home safe. If you don't remember anything else, you want to remember that to go home safe. So that certainly rings true, no matter what department you're looking at, right?
Absolutely, and regardless of what your assignment is, whether it's on patrol, whether it's doing undercover work as a detective, it doesn't matter. That's the main goal, is to go home safe and go home to your family, and just the decisions you make, just make sure they're reasonable. But a lot of times you don't have a lot of time to think about your alternatives. You kind of have to go with what comes to mind the quickest, and make sure it's reasonable at that time, because that's what the standard is. Everybody seems they want to question an officer's ability. They could have done this force option as opposed to this, or they could have done that as opposed to that. That's not the standard. The standard of what they did do, was that reasonable under the totality of the circumstances? That's where a lot of people really don't understand. Most times,
states changed policies like New Jersey, or most states moving towards proportionality, de-escalation, etc.?
From what I can see, a lot have. Certainly that de-escalation is big throughout the country. There's training going on by several different companies in New directives and guidelines that are coming out, as probably they should. I mean, each department should be having training on de-escalation. There's no need, unless someone's imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, there's no need to rush in anymore. If you can, if it's possible, and if it's feasible, take a step back. Give yourself time, distance, space, cover, wait for backup if you can. Try to use verbal communications. Again, you can't do that in every situation. Sometimes you're being attacked or someone else is being attacked, and you have to act immediately. But sometimes you do have that ability to step back and, for safety not only of yours, but the other person's safety as well. You don't want to use force unless you have to. And that's one of the big words that the AG's office has in their guidelines, and they had it before. It's got to be necessary. If it's not necessary, then why are you using force to begin with? But it's up to the officer to explain their actions of what they did and why they did it.
You know the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Do you think it's harder to train more experienced officers or officers that have been on the force for a longer period of time for the reasons you've stated? Is it easier to train brand new officers in this new policy?
Well, the new officers don't have any reference backwards in time. All I know is this new policy. If you have 15, 20 years on of being taught the same thing over and over again every year, now all of a sudden they want you to change it. It's going to take time, and you have to get on board with the changes. Otherwise, you can find yourself in trouble, if not criminally, civilly, or administratively, or all three together. And if you don't think you can do that, it might be time for you to move on to a different career.
Right. Are there any particular scenarios that you have seen that you believe become problematic for one reason or another? I mean, the George Floyd incident was a fairly minor investigation that just went out of control very quickly. But in the cases that you've had the ability to review, and again, I don't want you to give me any real specifics, but just generally speaking, is there something that stands out to you that is a situation that has a larger potential of going awry quicker?
I would say in all my years of investigating deadly force, I think the cases that bring the most scrutiny is when a subject is shot in the back by a police officer. Those generally bring the most criticism and
it
scrutinized.
happens. I mean, you hear about it, right?
It happens all the time.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why that could happen. And this is where you start getting into the human factor science, potentially, of a use of force encounter when it comes to, let's say, human reaction times. You have to understand information processing and how quick a person's ability to react to a particular stimuli. For instance, if a subject points a gun at you, shoots, and then quickly turns around, by the time the officer can draw his gun out, come out on target, the person might have already turned around and started running away, and the officer still shoots because he can't stop that action in time. It takes time to do that. Just like it takes time to start an action or respond to a certain stimulus, it takes time to stop that particular reaction as well. And that's not just an excuse for police officers. That's everyone in everyday life. Human reaction times have been studied for over 100 years. And now in the last probably 25 years, they're now starting to apply human factor science to police officers, and well, they should, because that may potentially add into the totality of the circumstances.
And that's a phrase that you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation. Now, as an expert, reviewing a case and then coming up with an opinion and testifying about it, is that human factor? Is that something that you're going to be commenting on?
I would if it applies to that case. Not every single use of force incident has a human factor element in it. But if you're going to investigate force or you're going to analyze force, you have to at least be cognizant of a possibility there may be some sort of human factor science involved in that situation. And if you don't, you're putting the officer at a complete disadvantage because you're not understanding the totality of the circumstances. You have to understand human reaction time. You have to understand physiological effects like tunnel vision, hearing loss, understanding perception and focus and attention that the officers are dealing with at the time, not necessarily the same as the body-worn camera.
Right.
So not every incident has a human factor element in it, but you have to be prepared to possibly deal with that. That's why the people that are doing the investigations in the force, whether it's deadly or non-deadly force, you have to have some sort of training in that. And then it's the same thing when it comes to the prosecutors. If you're going to analyze force, and you want to say whether an officer's force was reasonable or not, under the totality of the circumstances, you should have some sort of training yourself on human factor science. And that just comes with doing the job. I mean, just like officers have to adjust to new policies and guidelines, well, the science and the research that comes out, the attorneys themselves and the command staff of each police department should be knowing or have information on this as well.
Yeah, one case that got a lot of attention out in Minnesota was the officer, Kim Potter, who was found guilty of manslaughter and mistakenly drew her firearm instead of her taser. Is that something? I mean, I know, again, media-focused case, the public probably doesn't have all the information. I'm sure they don't have all the information, but something like that, is that a situation where you would apply this human element or human factor or not? Is that just something that should never happen?
No, that certainly applies to that. That's a weapon confusion case. That's had probably, I think this country's probably had 15 or 20 of those cases in the last 20 years or so.
What doesn't the public understand about something like that?
They don't understand the stress-induced heart rate that an officer has to go through in a critical incident like that, and how fast they have to make their decisions and be able to respond to those type of incidences. And a lot of that, when it comes to the weapon confusion case, a lot of it can come down to training, like what side of the officer is carrying their taser as opposed to where they're carrying their firearm. There's a lot of stuff like that that comes involved in that. It was a terrible incident for the person that she shot. It's a terrible incident for her because now she's was found guilty and had to go to jail. There's no winners in a situation like that. There's just they're terrible to have to go through them on both sides, and they're terrible to have to investigate something like that. And it's terrible for like a local prosecutor's office or district attorney's office to have to deal with that, because the scrutiny that comes with that could be overwhelming for their office as well. So,
Force Analysis LLC, if a defense attorney is defending an officer, they could reach out to you as long as it's not a state police case and have you review the file and consult on it and potentially testify?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I will review the case. I will review it objectively and impartially on the totality of the circumstances, reviewing everything that was involved in that case, and I'll give the attorney my honest opinion after I view it. And if they want an expert report stating what I think and why I think that way, I will certainly do that.
Yeah, it seems to me, if I'm a defense attorney, I would definitely, if I had a situation like that, want to reach out to you. How do people get a hold of you, Glenn?
My website, you get www.forceanalysisllc.com. My email, which is glenn@forceanalysisllc.com. And my phone number is also on my website too. They can call me. So anytime, whether it's a local prosecutor's office, whether it's a local police department themselves that want to review it administratively, whether it's the union or an attorney for the office themselves, when you get the consultant, you have to be willing to do both sides, and I'll review everything objectively and impartially as I can on all the information that I get at the time. And
where are you based out of?
Linwood, New Jersey.
Got it. But you can go all over, correct?
Yes, yeah. Okay. If an agency up north wants me to consult the case, no problem there. We can do most of the stuff by phone or video conferencing. At some point, if someone hires me, I'd probably want to go up and see the scene itself, where the incident happened, if I can, or if there's no photographs, or wherever I can to get the best perspective of what happened during the incident.
I didn't want to rush you today, but is there anything else that you wanted to comment on? We could certainly have you back and kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the policy in more detail. But was there anything else just today that you wanted to mention in this call?
Just like we talked about before, Meg, I could talk about use of force all afternoon, but I know we're on a time frame here. But my biggest thing is when you want to analyze force, don't just do it by watching a video. It's so much more than that. Understand the totality of the circumstances, and I understand that the media and the public don't have all the facts right away. It might take weeks or months for them to get all the facts. But don't just judge a police officer's action just by watching a video. You really have to understand the standard of force of objective reasonableness under Graham versus Connor, and realize that officers have to make split-second judgments under circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. You have to put yourself in their perspective at the time of the incident, not just look at it in 20/20 hindsight and sitting in the nice comfort of a chair at your desk and watch video and hit play, rewind over and over again. An officer has typically a very short amount of time to respond to an incident. You have to take that into consideration. Knowing what they were dispatched to, knowing what happened when they got there, and then what happened as the incident unfolded. What crimes were being committed before, during, or what they believed, or the officer believed was being committed. Understand the severity of the crime. Understand the immediacy of the threat, if there is one, to him or other people. Understand if the person is resisting and how they're resisting, and if the person's evading by flight and trying to run away. You have to take all that into under the circumstances and then decide whether the officer's use of force was reasonable.
Do you think the new directive does all that?
I think it does. I mean, it's I think a lot of the officers that I've spoken to were afraid of it, and I think some of them are afraid to use force now because they think necessarily the Attorney General's office is out to get them. And I just tell everyone the same thing. If you just know the policy, know how to explain and articulate what you did and why you did it, as long as it's reasonable, you're going to be fine. And just understand what the policy says. Understand what you can do in certain circumstances and what you can't do. And if you want to go away from that policy, you certainly have to explain what you did and why you did it. That's the biggest thing. I mean, police officers, the mentality years ago was the less you put in the report, the better. Now, I think since I've been on, I think it's the more that you put, the better. You really have to explain your actions and not just what you did. You have to explain how you were feeling and why you were feeling that specific way, because that all comes in the totality of the circumstances. You just know the guidelines, know the standard of Graham versus Connor, know and how to articulate that in your reports. That's the biggest thing, I think. Got it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today and kind of start digging into this. There is so much there, and it's certainly not as clear as I think a lot of people want to make it. So, having someone like you that has so many years of experience, has the experience to, look at a case objectively and apply the new directive in a way that's going to basically come up with an expert opinion as to whether or not that use of force was or was not proper is indispensable for both sides, prosecution and defense.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. And if anyone's looking for some consultation on use of force, just remember Force Analysis LLC.
Great. Force Analysis LLC. And I got to ask you, where did you grow up?
Boston, Massachusetts, right outside.
That's what I thought. Well.
Yeah, I transplanted my accent down here about back in 2000.
That's fantastic. Great. So you ready for some baseball?
I am. My Red Sox will be kicking off. I know they were postponed last night, but they're playing the Yankees tonight, and hopefully hoping for another playoff season and possible World Series.
Don't forget to subscribe and like the show on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere you listen.